Well, welcome to the Islam Unraveled Anti-Racism podcast. We have our esteemed guest, MP Sameer. Thank you for joining us from Quebec. Here, I think it's a 3 hour time difference, so really appreciate you joining us here. And to start off, what we like to talk about with our guests is a bit of the origin. What influenced you to seek out public office? Just a little bit of a background. Uh, you did hold a role as the vice president of the student union in Concordia. You ran for city council in Quebec as well. So let's talk about what inspired you to get into social justice, but also in public politics.
That's a great question, Tarek. And I think, as so many of your viewers and those tuning in will attest to, being born here, being somebody who doesn't necessarily fit the mold, I've been called upon to just explain who I am and what people perceive me as being. And I remember, from a very early age in grade one, I was asked to go in front of the class, and it was an innocent question on the part of the teacher, but to go in front of the class and to explain what prayer is. And back then, I was in grade one. I didn't know really much about it. I demonstrated some movements, all of which I couldn't exactly explain or fully demonstrate, and that was I think the first time that I can remember when I was asked to explain who I am. And I know it was an innocent question, but there have been many innocent questions over the last years that have been posed and asked. And I think, like so many of those who are tuning in, uh, you know, there is a lot of diplomatic relations that you have to do, a lot of bridge building. I myself come from a mixed background. My mom is from a historic Canadian city, Brockville, Ontario. She is herself mixed in background, Italian and Scottish mix. And my father came here in the 70s from Pakistan. And so within our household, we have our household is Muslim, but I have Jewish first cousins. My grandparents were Christian. We have people of all backgrounds within our household, and bridge building for me is something I deeply value. It's something that I've continued throughout the years in my public work. As you mentioned at the outset, uh, early on in Concordia, I was involved in student life. I remained involved in human rights work afterwards in human rights organizations, and promoted diversity inclusion in the academic sector as an employee there. And most recently, I'm serving as a member of parliament of a Montreal area riding of Pure Dollard for the Liberal Party.
And what were your influences or role models that really you sought to aspire to be like, or influenced your thought process?
Mm. That's a great question. I used to, in our developmental years, when we hit our late teens, early 20s, we look for role models, and I think we search for them. And like so many, I can't say any one person was a mentor formally, but I did look to role models, and I consumed a lot of biographies of men and women of our current time, and also who are involved in different moments of time. And as I was reading these biographies, I learned that nobody's a carbon copy. You can't carbon copy somebody else's path, but you can take best practices from other people's paths, and that's what I did try to do. And I noticed some common threads. A lot, not everybody, but a lot who were serving in a public capacity, be it in civil society or be it through elected office. A lot of them had studied law. So, although I have a math degree, which I got out of from my first undergrad, complete in my early 20s, I then shifted my career path after university because of my student experience within the domain of humanities and social sciences. in my 30s, I ended up getting a law degree from a French university here in Montreal, and that has those things have all contributed to my path. Role models, essentially, um, a lot of it from biographies, some from individuals who I in like they although they didn't know it, they were role models to me in my path.
And people like Jean Chrétien was a lawyer, as well as Bill Clinton in the U.S., Barack Obama, and so the legal tradition to really understand the law and the meaning of the law, and being in the province of Quebec, the oldest, in essence, province in Canada, hundreds of years old, a lot of rich history, and yourself, just your family dynamic, and your parents, you represent the cross section of Canada, which is amazing. Now, if you could just talk about, as we're starting to see around the world, racism is not going down; it's rising. And with the social media, the weaponization of social media, and far right groups and other groups seeking to divide, please tell us about your experience, especially historically in Canada, the first incident where a place of worship in Quebec City, where Muslims were killed at a mosque 4 years ago, and please talk about that, because obviously it's a very horrific aspect of our Muslim history here in Canada, but then also the government's response to this horrific act. So please talk about that.
Well, you bring me back to the night of that attack, and I remember I was in my home. I was doing some repairs late at night. It was around 10, 11 p.m. I get a call from some friends and advocates saying that this tragic killing happened in a Quebec City mosque, and that we needed to organize a public event the next day in Montreal. It was bitter cold. That night, that next day was approximately minus 20, minus 29. It was extremely cold.
Oh,
We ended up having a public event, and my heart, although these were this was a deeply disturbing attack that led to the loss of 6 lives and 19 children orphaned. It was a real shock. It could have been a lot of people who are tuning in, because it could have been anybody, and it was a shock. But my heart was warm despite how cold it was, to see the vast majority of people there were not directly impacted by the events. There were people in solidarity, average Quebecers from all walks of life, who were standing there in solidarity with those who were from the community targeted, namely the Muslim community. So that was a beacon of hope. Fast forward to today, this past year, um, uh, uh, our government recognized the day of January 29th as a day of remembrance around the Quebec City mosque attack, and also a national day to address and combat Islamophobia explicitly. This day is important. It gives a moment for communities across the country, from BC to the prairies to central Canada to the Maritimes, to talk about what happened in our country, and to ensure that this doesn't happen in any community. We, as you mentioned, words matter. Social media matters also. The conversations we have are important. We need to know that vigorous public debate is part of the democratic tradition of Canada and is welcomed. But we also need to be careful to not get into demonization of any community. We need to be careful to not contribute to stereotypes. We need to have a meaningful conversation that opens up people's minds and hearts. And you mentioned, yes, discrimination in its various forms does manifest itself to different communities at different times. You know, my great grandparents were Italian. They had troubles when they came here. At that time, that was different, right? Today, Italians are part of the mainstream. You know, it's pizza and pasta and the Italian flag. And this is celebrated and welcomed fully. Muslims and who are coming from different nations are now facing some of the challenges the Italians, Irish, and other Europeans faced over 100 years ago in our country, in Canada.
And Canada under Prime Minister Trudeau and the federal government welcomed tens of thousands of refugees from war-torn countries, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and others. Let's talk about that commitment, because when other countries are closing the doors to people in need that are in trauma, that need a safe harbor, please talk about that commitment of the government to refugees and protecting vulnerable people and bringing what we can here to Canada.
And that's a great legacy of our current government. That right from the beginning, we welcomed thousands upon thousands of Syrian refugees who are now today making concrete contributions to Canada, in particular around our struggle to address COVID. This is a great thing that our country has done, to welcome refugees from all walks of life across the world. And there are different human crises that happen that require a response. But thankfully, Canada, even during in the midst of COVID, has been at the fore of welcoming refugees here in Canada. Unlike many other countries, we haven't stopped welcoming asylum seekers who are fleeing for their lives to come to a safe space. You know, we're a middle power. We do what we can do, and I know that we have made the very significant contributions with respect to Syrians. We have welcomed 50,000, if my memory serves me right, 50,000, which exceeded our initial expectation as a country. And today, fast forward to today, there I personally know many Syrians who are serving in hospitals as nurses, as healthcare workers, helping us to address COVID as frontline workers. You know, this is a very important contribution on the part of asylum seekers to our country.
Absolutely. And I think with the government's commitment to social justice, and tragically a couple of days ago, the announcement here in British Columbia in Kamloops, the residential school, 215 of our First Nations children that were buried there, obviously under very evil circumstances. Please talk about the government's commitment to truth and reconciliation, and really our First Nations people, because one is we welcome again, as we said, our Syrian refugees, but also our First Nations people who have been displaced in their own lands. Let's talk about that.
It's Thank you for bringing that up. The discovery of the 215 children, this grave is truly tragic, and it's shocking that this happened in Canada. And it's a shocking reminder that we have so much work to do here. This did happen in the past, but what happened in the past is still impacting us till now. I was at an event yesterday, a gathering, a vigil, organized by the Indigenous community here in Montreal. There were hundreds of people in solidarity, and one of the speakers spoke about how she herself was in foster care, and from her community, it's a very young community, but half the children today are in foster care. So what happened in the past with respect to residential schools, it's still impacting people. Imagine if any community, any city had half of its children in foster care. That would be unconscionable. We have a lot of work to do. We talk about what's happening overseas, as we should, but we must also equally give effort to fully reconciling with our Indigenous people here in Canada. We must work on both equally, both what's happening overseas and here at home. And if we don't address what's happening here at home, we really have no moral authority to talk about what's happening overseas. I'm not saying that people should forget what's happening around the world. No, we are global citizens, and we are have a high awareness of what's happening from other places where some of our ancestors are hailing from. But we must also, all of us, collectively work to reconcile with the indigenous communities here on whom's land we are living. Right, in the past, this was unceded. This is unceded indigenous land for many of us. We need to fully reconcile to ensure that the indigenous communities in Canada have full enfranchisement, as so many Canadians enjoy. The government is working on this, has been very diligent, and has been like giving a lot of resources. This must continue. I think we have to recognize that this does take time. Generations of injustice is not undone in 5 or 6 years. It will take continued effort, and we cannot stop uh, right now just because some progress has been made. In order for us to fully reconcile, we must continue as diligently as we have been in the last recent years, the 5, 6 recent years, into the future.
And equality, justice, respect, equal rights. And this is a desire, and you brought up, around the world in Palestine, and uh, what we're seeing, even with our First Nations hosts, is systematic discrimination, and systematic in terms of language. These residential schools were to take the culture, tradition, beliefs, even names, even traditional clothing, to strip the virtual identity of First Nations people to be more like a Eurocentric view of what those schools were intended for. So obviously, to celebrate our diversity, and we talk about diversity, and your work throughout your career has been diversity and working on intercultural connections. So let's talk about that work and what you've learned in that work, meeting other communities. Please talk about that.
I think we need to, for communities that we're not familiar with, we need to take the time to listen and to put ourselves in other people's shoes, squarely, fully, in order to understand their vantage point. And until we do so, we are not able to wholly work on diversity inclusion. So as a start, for anybody who is starting in this sort of work, I would say suspend any ideas, pre notions that you have, and just enter somebody else's shoes with full empathy, and learn from that experience. After some time within that space, with that perspective in mind, can one be involved in the work of diversity inclusion? And that obviously requires an experiential component, which is what I just described, to have some level of an experience that is meaningful. And two is an intellectual component, which I think a lot of people do quite well, where we learn, and then let the dust settle, and try to put things together that gives value at the end and basic respect and dignity to everybody.
And what we found in our anti-racism work, and intercultural work, is when we reach out to First Nations, Jewish communities, and Christian communities, and we would go to their respective places of worship. Uh, the shocking thing was many said, "We've never met Muslims before." Have you had that same experience in
A
gathering
hundred,
divinity?
100%. I mean, I've myself heard from other communities, oh, we don't have an interlocutor in X or Y community, the Muslim community, for example. We don't have somebody till now. We've not had anybody that we've engaged with, and engagement is important. And And I think that we need to focus on the shared values that we have, the shared common values as a starting point to engage. And engagement doesn't end simply at clothes and food, and like appreciating clothes and food, but it starts with things like that. It starts with safe spaces, safe conversations. And when relationships thicken, then you can have more deeper conversations because relationships have thickened. But until that point in time, the deeper conversations aren't possible. They are necessary though. This type of work is not easy because it requires that one be level-headed, that one calm their emotions because sometimes it's emotionally difficult to engage. So one first has to be ready for that, be and listen to other people's perspectives, um, because as I mentioned earlier, one might have preconceived ideas, but you got to suspend them. And you got to say to yourself, I'm going to shelve that and I'm going to really empathize and put myself in the shoes of the other person.
And even when we look at similarities, and one very interesting revelation when meeting with the Jewish community and Christian community, um, although I felt I knew to some degree about Judaism and Christianity, but many people, with few exceptions, didn't know very much about Islam and the similarities and the historical kind of the Abrahamic roots of Islam with Christianity and Judaism. So I thought, even from one thing is meeting Muslims are not meeting them, but actually the shared some of the shared beliefs and shared histories. That was another eye opener because assumptions. I think going by assumptions, thinking people know to some degree about our faith, our community, our people, that was an assumption that was incorrect on my part.
100%. And I'll share something with your audience. I myself, as I mentioned earlier on, come from an extended family that has many different faith traditions, and this has always been part of our household conversation, our extended family conversation, the diversity we have within it. More recently, I actually engaged with a bridge building project between Jews and Muslims, and I was invited to participate in that. I actually went to Jerusalem through a bridge building project and also to the West Bank. But the majority of my engagement, though, was with the Jewish community, approximately 80%, where I took the time to learn from rabbis, from those who are involved in peace negotiations on both sides, people who are involved in social, cultural, political conversations, religious conversations. And, I think it's important that we take the time to understand each other and suspend our our preconceived notions and listen to each other. And that allows us to find the shared overlapping space and to realize that at the end of the day, all that people want is, if we're talking about the Middle East, is to live in peace, dignity, basic basic dignity, peace and respect, and also security. Everybody shares that common value, or most people do. And it's those are difficult conversations. It's extremely difficult because I know that emotions are charged across the board, and people are approaching the Middle East from different angles. We need to thicken the space, safe spaces where people are able to engage in sometimes the tough conversations in a way that allows for meaningful conversation. And 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 I think that is critical. And we need to model appropriate behavior here in North America. If we can do that, there is hope for the Middle East. But if we ourselves are not able to model appropriate conversations here, then how can we expect people in the Middle East to do so? This path is not going to be it's not going to be easy. It's a bumpy path, but it's one that we must walk.
And what I find fascinating about you talk about family and monolithic views, and so sometimes when people say the First Nations or the Jewish community or the Muslims, and there's an assumption of a monolithic belief that everyone believes the same thing at the same time, and I'm sure in our work, especially with other faith communities, not everyone believes the same thing on current events as everybody else. Some are left wing, some are right wing, some are just apathetic or uninformed. And so, even within our own immediate families, we can point to the fact that many of us have completely different viewpoints in one's own immediate family. And so, I think the Canadian perspective and your personal perspective, from a family perspective, the diverse views and beliefs that people have. And maybe you could just share that the monolithic idea that all Muslims are like this, or all First Nations are like this, or all Jewish people are like that. I think that is something that when people don't interact or engage, it's very easy to fall into that thinking.
100%. And when it comes to Muslims, I mean, I think a lot of your audience members have received firsthand instances of discrimination. There's no question. And we know that a lot of people have been misinformed about who Muslims are. Things are getting a lot better now than they were 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. But still, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Um, and as you mentioned, engagement is critical, and each and every community has many different shades of gray. There's like things are rarely black and white. Things are much more often in many different gray zones. And the Muslim community is like that. Indigenous people are like that. Jewish communities, all communities are like that. And I think that and that what comes to the idea of suspending judgment, preconceived notions, put them aside because oftentimes they're inaccurate, and to have them as the filter by which one engages with communities is counterproductive and not helpful. And I think we need a lot more people to be involved in the bridge building work that is very necessary. Canada is a mosaic of people from many different walks of life, and that is something that I think that's an important way to approach our society and to approach engagements.
And I'll share with you a personal story. I'm born and raised in Canada, and there's a small town called Fort St. John, which is near the Peace River region, near the Yukon, Northwest Territories. So predominantly a white community. And as there was no other Muslims or people of Pakistani origin in that community, I had this perception. I thought Islam was just a Pakistani thing because I didn't know any other. I hadn't met any other Muslims from any background. And again, I was growing up in a school that they were all white Caucasian and some First Nations, and that was it. And that was my perspective. So even my own internal ignorance was there because I literally hadn't met any Muslims from any other country up until that point, until we moved to Vancouver. And so I can see how it's very easy if people have never interacted with Muslims, they'll believe whatever they see online. And now this one topic I want to talk about is disinformation online, racism online, demonizing and these kind of false narratives that are catching fire, where people are believing insane conspiracy theories like QAnon and others, and demonizing groups. Let's talk about that, and perhaps how the government is looking at aspects of online and online hate, and even in your experience, we brought up the Quebec shooter. A lot of the research is that he was radicalized online with right-wing extremist theories. So let's talk about how online disinformation is creating a lot of real-world racism.
Mm. I think we need to be aware that of the algorithms on social media feeds, that they oftentimes encourage us to only see what we want to see, which are echo chambers. And if we want to inform ourselves on any conversation, we need to proactively look outside of our social media echo chambers. They just reinforce our ideas and are not helpful for understanding the spectrum of the world that we live in, and or even our communities that we live in. And on any debate, that's the case. I encourage people to always look for trusted news sources, and there are many of them in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, and other places. You know, focus on trusted news sources. Um, I wouldn't lose touch with them. Um, for if one ever sees people who are going off in the deep end, pull them back. It's important to pull them back, to have to maintain that conversation with them and pull them away from any sort of false ideas or going off in a deep end. And with respect to online hate, we are, as a government, working on that. We will be introducing concrete measures around this to tackle online hate. I'm sure some of your previous interviewees spoke to it, particular Minister Munsaf. But the online hate is something we're very serious around. We've invested a lot of energy into that, and the piece would essentially require social media companies to take down online hate within a certain delay of time, a small delay of time, and to remove that from social media platforms. But I think that we all have to take an individual responsibility at the same time. If we need to be careful about the conversations we have. We need to keep in mind that at the end of the day, we're looking to convince somebody and not just to win a point, right? Or to win a debate. It's not about winning debates. It's about convincing somebody of what you have to say. And I would say that should be the goal of how one engages in the social media space. Um, if we can do that, we can have a lot more of a civil conversation, both offline and online.
And our concept in Canada, freedom of expression, and then there's elements of online hate, incitement to violence, incitement to harm, incitement to kill. So there is a freedom of expression within civil, society, but then content that is is tailored in a way to motivate people to commit heinous acts. As we mentioned earlier, we did a program called Stop Asian Hate, Allies United, with the Asian community, because here, sadly, the city of Vancouver is the leading city in North America for Asian hate, which was sad. And so that in mind, and Muslims, again, not a monolith, that 20 to 30% of worldwide Muslims are from Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, mainland China. So we are, our diaspora is all over the world. And so with attacks on elderly people, attacks on women, and we had attacks on women, Muslim women in Edmonton, Calgary, the city of Surrey. I'm sure out east in Ontario, we had a caretaker for a mosque in Ontario whose throat was slit by a far-right extremist, a satanic neo-Nazi group, which is a crazy thing when you think about it. So these things are happening in Canada, and although we have our diversity, we have so much social justice, but per capita, the hate crimes are equivalent or more in some cases than the United States. So, and online hate is a key component in radicalization and motivating people for these type of crimes. So, in terms of the real world, I know the government has provided a lot of support for NGOs, funding for anti-racism groups, funding for mental health support. Let's talk about the support systems for people, one, to protect them, but also to when people are victims, how the government is looking at ways to support marginalized and minority communities.
It's a great question. So we've had anti-racism funding that was rolled out during the period of COVID. And, a lot of your audience members, they should regularly look to what grants are available from the federal government. We have grants for community centers, for places of worship when it comes to security infrastructure, meaning cameras, so that, if any, God forbid, hate crimes occur to these places, that it can be recorded, the evidence can be collected in order to prosecute somebody who commits any sort of vandalism towards, a building. Um, we have that. That's an ongoing program called the Security Infrastructure Program. We have in the summer we have funding to create jobs for young people. That money has already been given out, but that's an annual thing. So next winter, I would look towards that, to contact your member of parliament's office for those organizations, and make an application to apply for that funding, so you can create a job for a young person. We have a Black entrepreneurship program right now, which has been rolled out for Black entrepreneurs, because we recognize that there has been historic discrimination towards Black entrepreneurs, where they don't get the loans that somebody else who's not Black would get with the same dossier. So we proactively created a program for Black entrepreneurs. These are things that we do regularly in order to course correct. That'll be ongoing, but do look out for them, for your audience members. And I know sometimes people say, well, it's hard to put a grant together. You might not get on the first try, but I know people who've gotten on a second and third try, if not on the first, right? So just because it's a bit challenging doesn't mean that one shouldn't try to get those funds, because a lot of people do benefit from them, and your audience members should also.
And as we are slowly coming out of the pandemic and Canada's restart, obviously the economy's been hit, and then mental health across the board because of the pandemic, isolation, being in homes, domestic violence, and the government has done significant steps to ease the burden for families, for businesses, but the toll of mental health and the economy. Please talk about mental health supports and obviously the plan ahead for the economy as we ease out of the pandemic.
Hmm. So we've been funding both those that are addressing mental health within our population, but also those who are dealing with domestic violence towards women and children. Most homes have been safe, and most homes have been happy homes, for the most part, because we've been able to reconnect with our families in a much deeper way, that we in relation to how pre-pandemic life was. We're working at home, we sleep at home, and we're able to reconnect in a way that wasn't the case before. Some homes, though, are not safe, unfortunately, and we recognize that. As a result, we have funded women's groups that address that exact problem. And when it comes to mental health supports, we know that being stuck indoors is not pleasant, right? And some of us, it drives some of us, bonkers, for lack of a better term. But it really creates a lot of anxiety for some, depression for others. There has been a spike in mental health challenges, which are very normal. I think that many of us have felt certain periods where we have had our own personal challenges during this pandemic. That is very normal. And as a result, we have prioritized mental health to address it in order for our population to be on firm footing. We're now seeing light in this tunnel that we're in. We're getting towards the end of it. Is it going to be a fast like an reopening that'll happen with a snap of a finger? No, it will be a gradual reopening, but it has started. We'll have to continue to remain vigilant. It's important as we reopen to still, respect whatever rules are in place, to be mindful, because some are still not vaccinated, but we will hopefully get there to return to a new normal. And I'm hoping that society, that we will take some lessons from this, where we will ask employees who work in an office to come, 2, 3, maybe 4 days a week to the office, but 2, 3 days should be okay. We have learned to operate 5 days a week for months on end at home and continue doing our work fully and diligently. So hopefully now workplaces will change, where people will be coming into the office, but also will be able to work from home in their careers.
Absolutely, and that's a great point that you brought up, and how that relates to environmental impact and reducing our carbon footprint, and in our previous discussion with Minister Monsef, is Canada's goal to be net zero by 2050, which is an ambitious goal. And one thing we talk about with our colleagues is that the climate emergency affects every race and religion equally. So that is
100%.
one thing that we should all keep in mind as faith communities, that our responsibility as faith communities to the environment, and obviously the government's a huge role in that. Let's just talk about that, because this is a very big step our country is taking, hopefully can be a model for other countries in the world, and it affects all Canadians and hopefully other people around the world. Please talk about Canada's commitment to the environment.
So I know a lot of your audience members are deeply concerned about human rights, dignity and respect to people. There are We know also that in the future wars may be waged over water, and there is a nexus between human rights and protecting the environment. If we aren't mindful about how we use our natural resources, and to use them in a sustainable way, there will be inevitably be repercussions in other parts of the world. There will be drought and famine and potentially conflict because of the overconsumption of natural resources here. So and we have to recognize our role as an industrialized nation. We are consuming more than many other parts of the world. So we have to be doubly, if not triply, mindful about how we are consuming resources here. So getting to net zero by 2050 is absolutely critical for not only us here in North America, in Canada, but also for many people across the world. Otherwise, famine will be on the increase and conflicts will happen due to scarcity of resources, right? So we do have a role to play in that. And I know that a lot of us are recycling, many of us are composting. That's great. Let's continue with that. Let's move away from single-use plastics. When we go to the grocery store, are we bringing a reusable bag with us, or even an old plastic bag, and we're using it not only once but maybe 10 times? And then using that bag that is a bit tattered as our bag for our garbage can. So really taking the most we can out of plastics, for example, shifting from gas guzzling cars to fuel efficient, to hybrid, to electric vehicles. So are we moving towards there? So I would underscore that not only is this a concern for future generations here in Canada, but it's also a concern for those who care about human rights internationally. So let's do our part, each and every one of us.
Absolutely. And one report we got out of the Yaqeen Institute is that climate change will disproportionately affect Muslim majority countries. So Indonesia, Southeast Asia, the Indian subcontinent, and the Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa, which are Muslim majority populations, or huge populations of Muslims. So it behooves us here in Canada to advocate locally to globally, in every way possible, to protect our generation, our future generations from this climate emergency. Now, you brought up global events, and one of the causes that you've worked on is for Uyghur rights, and obviously we talked about a lot of the social justice we're working on in Canada, that we live in a country that values human life, that values every single person, and is willing to provide many levels of support. But with what's happening with the Uyghur genocide, again, it's a humanitarian crisis and a genocide, which has been stated by the Parliament as well as the American government and the EU. So there's a lot of condemnation to what's happening there. Please talk about your work regarding supporting Uyghur rights and protecting the Uyghur peoples.
So thank you for bringing this up. And this is a major human rights issue of the day. This is something that I personally and my team have been working on for several months. We have pushed this file as others, and building awareness within the House of Commons, but also Canadian society. Myself, I'm co-chair of the Uyghur Friendship Group of Parliamentarians, and we meet regularly to discuss the situation towards Uyghur, Kazakhs, and others in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in eastern China, also called East Turkestan. And this is, it's tragic what's happening there. There are hundreds of thousands of people in concentration camps, unspeakable horrors that are occurring to women. Children are being separated from their families. People are being forced to produce products that we unwittingly consume. And this cannot continue. China is an important global actor. We have many different engagements with China. But we must also ensure that we are dealing with this extremely important human rights issue that the Parliament of Canada has recognized is a genocide. And we're not alone in this. As you mentioned, America, the EU, the UK, Holland, many other countries have recognized that there is a genocide and very serious human rights abuses occurring. Now, I think it's important for your audience members to know that approximately 20% of global cotton is produced out of the region where Uyghur people are and are being thrown into camps. It's produced from forced labor. 20% of global cotton, 80% of China's cotton comes from Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So this is something for us to reflect upon and to consider and to know about and to ask companies, where are you producing your cotton? Where are the supply chains? Second thing we need to be aware of, as we just talked about going green. Almost half of the base material for solar panels is produced from Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Half of the 42% of polysilicon, which is a base material for solar panels, is produced from the region. That should be pause for us. We need to protect the environment. We can do so without forced slave labor products. And then we turn to tomato products, talking about ketchup, talking about pasta sauce. I love pasta. You know, we wanna make sure that this also is free of forced labor products, or forced labor, I should say. Approximately 35% of tomato derivatives are from the region, right? So this is a real concern. We have, as a government, introduced measures around this. Earlier this year, in January, we introduced both import and export measures. We have started to implement them. We need to sharpen them further as a country, and this is important for us. We don't want to be unwittingly consuming these products. We have also introduced sanctions for high-level officials who are involved in what the Parliament has said, what the House of Commons has said is a genocide. We're not alone in that. We were joined with the European countries, and also America has several sanctions in place towards those who are involved in these very serious crimes against humanity. I would like to note that the Jewish community has been a very important ally on this because of the Holocaust. They have recently gone through this and recognize that this cannot happen again. Not and it's entirely unacceptable. The Jewish community has been involved on this point, vocal on this point. I think all Canadians have to be. We all must be speaking to this issue. This is a very deep and serious human rights concern. And it's unconscionable what's happening right now. Forced sterilization, which is essentially eliminating a future generation from even coming to this world, is occurring. This, while China has just now um, said that government policy is that people can have couples can have 3 children. So we have to educate ourselves on this. We have to share the news on this from legitimate sources like the BBC, CBC. The Guardian has done some great reporting. New York Times has done some excellent reporting. Share that and educate ourselves and others. It's not going to get solved overnight, but it will get solved by us working on the issue. I can't hear you, Tarek.
My apologies. We'll edit that. The Canadian Multi-Faith Initiative for Uyghur Rights. So it's a consortium of churches, synagogues, mosques across Canada that have sent again a letter writing campaign to MPs and other government officials, but also working on various solutions to look at ways to have the government of Canada do more for Uyghur rights. So this was actually the big champions here locally were to organize this was again the Jewish community here locally, and so again heartening to feel the Canadian team come together, regardless of faith, regardless of color, for these important kind of global as well as local issues. And as we are coming to the end of our time, I wanted to share that what happened because of Quebec 4 years ago, and many people, and I'm sure it was like this in Quebec, many people from multiple faiths, colors, and backgrounds came to our mosques. They brought flowers, they brought cards. People came, I saw people crying tears, and these are folks that weren't obviously, they were people from other communities. And to see that heart of Canada, to see that Canadians care about their fellow Canadians, regardless of religion or color, and are willing to come out, as you said, minus 29. And we had a blizzard for our vigil. We had thousands of people, many non-Muslims that came. So I think we have a great country. We have a great cultural mosaic, and our country works to celebrate its diversity and social justice. And so maybe in closing comments to leave on a note of hope and a note of positivity, please some final comments for our viewers and our audience.
Well, I would encourage your viewers and audience to work diligently and understand that change takes time. One has to be patient in terms of wanting change and advocating for change, but it does happen. There have been so many cases in this country where we have reconciled, where we have recognized mistakes we've made and acknowledged them and course corrected. This takes time. The concerns that your audience members have are legitimate, but one needs to understand that to really see the world you want to see, you have to be involved, and you have to also be patient, because it doesn't happen overnight. But being involved is critical, and it's critical that your audience members raise their voices in a way that looks to educate people and to have people understand. At the end of the day, in our communication, we want people to understand what we're saying, It's not about winning debates. It's about truly, uh, you know, um, uh, convincing somebody of your points. And the one who shouts the loudest isn't the one who wins the debate. It's the one who is able to convince somebody. And oftentimes, softer words are better than louder words.
And on that note, as you are a member of parliament, a seat at the table, being involved in politics on the municipal level, provincial level, school board, federal level, to get involved, it takes time. And you've had your twists and turns, and alhamdulillah, you're serving a high office in our country. So we very much honored to have you on our podcast, and thank you for joining us. And we hope to work with you in the future.
It's a pleasure to be here, Tarek. Thank you for organizing this, working so people are informed, and thank you for this.